We are good to go
Pressing
live.
the button now. Going live.
And we are live with Peter Diamond.
Hello.
Who is braving an allergy storm, and we're very, very grateful for that.
Yeah, sorry, you're not getting me at my best. So if I'm leaking fluids out my face, it's just that time of year for me, unfortunately.
We've got some familiar faces in the comments section here. We've got Leia Butters in the house, Caffeine and Collectibles, who've been basically every session, I think. And I think a couple of hours ago they were saying it's 4 a.m. here. And then we've got who else? We've got Muragaya. Hi, Muragaya.
Sorry, I was just opening the window there, and I think you got some feedback. Sorry.
That's right. And Dan Zander. Good morning from a place that is way too effing hot for this early in the morning. So he's somewhere hot. I don't know where Dan Zander is.
I used to live in Saskatchewan. I used to live in Saskatoon. I went to elementary school there.
Oh wow, awesome.
Caffeine and Collectibles is obviously not a name I recognize from my childhood, but I don't know if this is somebody I know from my past. Saskatchewan's a big place. It's probably not, but anyway. I can't help but wonder.
Thank you, Peter. Obviously, you joined us last year, and it's great to have you. And the studio tour you gave us was definitely a favourite for the audience. And people were looking at, what books has he got? I think you were telling us about about how your studio is ideally placed in terms of for sunlight as well, and all sorts.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, it's really nice.
All sorts of amazing insights into your process. Lumo says, "Hey, looking forward to this session. Big fan." Obviously, well, let's. If you could just tell us, for those who may not be familiar with your work, or whether it be poster or otherwise, if you could just give people an idea of what kind of art you tend to do and for who, and any design work that you do and that sort of thing, so that people can get an idea of who you are and what you're about, that'd be great.
Sure, yeah. Well, I got started doing illustration like 20 years ago, I guess, while I was still in art school. And I started out doing the way that I started before I thought of it as illustration was doing posters for like Xeroxed black and white posters for local punk rock shows. And that sort of grew into occasionally, doing album covers for bands that were mostly my friends. And I sort of tried to make that into a career, and it didn't really work. And so then I started doing more like editorial illustration, a little bit of advertising, like more sort of standard commercial illustration stuff. Mm-hmm. And now in the last few years, getting into this scene is really interesting because it's kind of like coming full circle. Because, if I had stuck in the stream that I was in earlier on, I probably would have ended up in the same place. Like we were talking the other day, one of the guys on the panel was Dan Mumford, and I remember discovering his work, like him and Florian Bertmer were, I'd probably saying that last name wrong, on MySpace. And they were two guys doing this really awesome like albums and t-shirts and stuff. And that was kind of the stream that I was in. And then I went off in this other direction, and now that I come back, those two dudes are in this field as well. And it went from gig posters to alternative movie posters. And anyway, so that's sort of my path, and I tend towards a lot of I like medieval stuff, epic stuff, sort of. I like pre-modern things mostly. I'd rather draw a horse than the New York City skyline or whatever.
What about both? What about a horse?
A horse and the New York City skyline? Yeah. I would probably find some kind of cheeky way to sort of cut the corners of drawing the skyscrapers, but yeah, that's just where I tend to land.
obviously the key theme, and I know you've contributed a few bits on this particular topic thus far, because you've been in you popped in on the social, and we had you in the panel as well yesterday, I think. But if you could just talk to us a little bit about how you approach composition, which is a key theme for this year. If you just talk a little bit about how you approach composition when you are coming up with your ideas, and then how you sort of how you're keeping an eye on composition throughout the process. That would be great. Yeah, absolutely.
There's so much to say about composition because it's my primary obsession. I'll try not to say everything because it'll get to be like a treatise or whatever. But I think the main thing is it's a hierarchy. There's so many factors that go into making a picture, and they all have to be organized in a way that it at least looks like you've got control over what's happening on the page. And in the end, it's about making sure that there's, like, people often talk about it in terms of balance, and balance sort of implies symmetry, and that isn't really the case. It's that you want people's attention, the appearance of weight and depth to be arranged in the way that you want it. And so that involves knowing what you want. So knowing what you're trying to say in the picture. And the way that I do it, I'm going to see if there's a decent page in one of these sketchbooks to show what I mean. So you start really, really small. And these are just sort of options. These are thumbnail sketches. And one of the reasons you work small at the start is that it's quicker, right? You don't waste a lot of time. But the other thing is that you're boiling away everything that's not absolutely fundamental to the way the picture works. So you're boiling away detail and like line style and texture and color and all of that. And you're really just kind of dealing with shapes. And then from there, you can get, basically, if you've got something that works good when it's this big, and you can kind of see what's happening, and it sort of communicates the general idea that you want, then you can feel pretty confident that as you go through and as you refine it, it's gonna have good bones, right? And then from there, I will take it to grayscale. So there you're dealing with light and dark, and that's really, really critical. Like, that's almost as fundamental as the basic shapes. That determines which things are heavier, which things are further back, which things are closer. It determines a lot of the mood and the tone. And then from there, you start figuring out how your colors are going to work, because temperature has the same effect as light and dark. Warm things tend to come forward and cool things tend to sit back, and you sort of balance those out. And then eventually you get into details. And even when you're talking about line and texture, you still have the same principle of trying to balance the different kinds of textures and lines across the page. So for me, I do a lot of line work. So where is it dense? Where is it really busy, and where is it really open? That also contributes to the final picture and to the message that you're giving. So all of those things come together a little bit like, I don't know, like an orchestra in a way. So I think one good way to think of it is in musical terms, that you've got to arrange all these different voices and timbres and whatever of all the different instruments to get them to all sing the same song, right? And yeah, I guess that's a sort of in something of a nutshell how I look at it. And we could look at some specific examples if you want.
We'll bring some up, but I find it very interesting. If you compare like how Matt Ferguson goes straight to the computer and he's working, and that's how he's doing, and he's sort of seeing what sticks. Yeah. But he talks about the postage stamp test.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, after you've done a poster and you reduce it to the size of a postage stamp, I mean, you might be being a bit facetious by saying postage stamp. He might mean a little bit larger than that. But he's talking about a very small image.
Yep.
Does it work? And I think you go from micro to max by in that the correct way around, because it will always, if it works small as that little sketch, then it will, and you bring it to that sort of fully designed large poster. And I think when you obviously there's this blend, there's this sort of in this culture, it's particularly when you're talking about like movie posters. Obviously, some of the work you would do is like art prints and whatnot. But when you're thinking about a movie poster, okay, so that was a poster that sold a film. Yes, okay, when you stand close to it, you have that experience of it's an amazing poster and look at all these details. But it also has to stand out when you're walking away. You're in the movie theater and there's some posters on the wall. You have to be drawn into it. So so the composition has to work, and you're seeing it as a small. Yeah,
I think in this particular space, the alternative movie posters, that rule that you just described, which is one that I absolutely hold to, it gets relaxed a little bit, because none of the posters that we're making, with a few exceptions, I mean, like the Empire Strikes Back on your wall, for example, with very few exceptions, none of them are actually selling movies. What their actual purpose is to hang on somebody's wall, and in these, in a small private space. So there's the value of Easter eggs and intense detail and packing a lot of stuff in. The value of that starts to rise when you're talking about collector's prints. And it's not really the way that I work, but there's a lot of really good artists in this space who do stuff where, they might be breaking some of those compositional rules that you were just talking about. Like, where if you saw it on a pole from 100 yards away, you actually wouldn't know what you're looking at, because it's so dense. But that's not where you're going to be seeing it anyway. You're going to be seeing it in someone's living room, and you'll be able to zone right in and start looking at all the little details. Exactly. But I tend to work the other way. It's a little more old-fashioned, and I want something to be more, like, almost like I'm pretending that it is really a poster that's...
We're going to bring up some of your... Obviously, you was an amazing piece from you revealed this week for Mondo, the IFC 20th anniversary collection, and we've got some of your sketches here for, I suppose you did multiple ideas by the looks of it, for Hunger. So we're going to bring up one now, so what we can see here is I'm trying to see it actually. There's I think it's a selection of bodies around a circular. Right. So for this, what I'm going to do for a minute is, since we've got this delay on the feed, I'm just going to wait a second until I see this one on screen, because some of the other artwork that I've sent to you, I can just look at on my website on the side. These ones I can't. So I just got to wait for a second. Okay, now I can see it. And that one, that's a cluster of bodies, really. And that film is so much like, one of the things I really can't stand in films is body horror. I'm interested in a lot of horror films, like aspects of them, but body horror I hate. However, Hunger is interesting because it's almost body horror. Like, there's so much, he's just soaking the film in a sense of like your own mortality and like your physical frailty. And there's so much of that in the film. And that sketch just really kind of just totally hones in on that. And there's these scenes where they're smearing feces on the walls. Have you seen this film? I'm not sure. I'm gonna be honest. No.
No. Okay.
I didn't realize that was in there.
Yeah, it's about Bobby Sands and the hunger strikes, the IRA hunger strikes. And there's a scene where they paint the walls and it's called, what did they call it? Like a dirty strike or something like that. Anyway. And I was going to work with these sepia tones and the sort of swirled texture of the feces on the walls, but render these bodies out of it. I'm not surprised they didn't pick that one, but
That's your
yeah.
punk. That's your punk days coming through. We got a bit of
maybe, yeah. But it's also just trying to be true to the film. You know, the film is rough. It's not an easy watch.
It's sort of the G.G. Allen coming out.
Yeah, I was never a big G.G. Allen guy, I have to say. That was never quite my thing, but yeah.
So we'll bring up the sketch for your actual for the piece that actually came out, I think.
Yeah.
And it's a stunning piece. As I say, I think the use of negative space here is something that that I haven't seen you do lots of. It's gonna come up on screen in a second. But your rendering of and your use of it, and the way that he sort of disintegrates into the black. I mean, it would be great to hear what your sort of thoughts are in what your sort of intentions are with your message on this poster.
Yep, for sure. So the negative space point is an interesting one, because negative space is one of these things that casual viewers and a lot of collectors, at least these days, don't understand as well as some others. People can be very sensitive to negative space. Like, you'll hear, it doesn't look finished, or, you know, there's too much negative space, as though there being a lot of negative space is clearly a bad thing. But negative space it's just the brother of positive space, and it's like silence in music. It's every bit as important as anything else. And I actually love using negative space, but it tends to be harder to sell people on designs that have that use negative space in a very kind of loud way. But with this one, I think it was obvious how it made sense. Now, to be honest, where that idea originally came from is from Egon Schiele. I don't know how many people know him. I mean, you probably know his images when you see them, but he's a famous Austrian painter of the early 20th century. And he did these great portraits and self-portraits and he was very skinny, and he did these amazing, like, emaciated figures. And he has a classic self-portrait that's in one of the museums here in Vienna of him on just white space. And I've always loved it, and I've always wanted to kind of steal it. And I did here, but with this one, it just so clearly makes sense, because this guy, you know, he's at this point in the film, he's alone in his cell, he's dying, he's just kind of, and he's dying in a very particular way. He's just kind of letting himself
go
run dry, and he just kind of vanishes in a way. So that was the idea, to combine this idea of being alone in the dark and fading into death. And so we had that kind of like drip effect at the bottom, which also looks a little bit like entrails, which wasn't really the point, but is very appropriate to the film in the end. And this sketch that you've chosen, I sent you a whole bunch of sketch files. This one, you'll see it's called Concept 2B, because the first version of that, you see a lot more of his rib cage and his spine, and it's just a little nastier. And in the end, Mondo wanted to go with, even though they, as creatives, liked the one with the rib cage and all of that, there is some consideration of, what are people really going to be willing to hang on their walls. So we went with the one that was a little gentler in that regard. We'll
bring up the red version just so that people can actually see it if they haven't actually seen the actual finished article as well. I say, when in musical composition, sometimes it's about the note. When people say sometimes it's about the notes you don't play.
Absolutely,
and negative space is,
Yep.
And the
negative space is very much the same thing. And one of the things people can look for, if any of the people watching can relate to what I was saying about feeling that negative space is kind of a loss, one of the things to understand about it is that any negative space can be seen as positive space. So in this case, if you're looking at the poster and you're just looking at the black and you try to see the black as being a shape, it's a particular kind of shape. And a lot of the time, like the best images, the type of shape that's being made by the negative space is appropriate to the positive image. So for example, if you have like an action scene in a Deadpool comic and he's, chopping somebody in half, if you crop that drawing so that you get a lot of jagged negative space, it's going to work a lot better than if you zoom out and the negative space starts to soften, because it's going to soften the image. Then if you have a poster where you've got a character and you zoom in on him and the negative space is just kind of on either side of him, he really takes up that space. He's very present. You start to imagine what might be off screen. It could be anything. If you shrink him down and he's just in the middle like this, all of a sudden he's alone, right? And the emotional impact of that is completely different. So here what it's doing is it's allowing him to fade into it, but it's not dominating him completely, because it's still a portrait of the actor and of the character. And then that at the bottom of the picture where the negative space is so, it's not exactly jagged, but where it's all busted up, that becomes a very interesting part of the image that draws your eye into it and sort of draws you down off the page.
It's a stunning piece. So well done.
It's meant to be read, actually. I'll show you the painting from it, the original. This was the original colorway. Wow. This is how I painted it initially. And the idea is this is very like vascular. This is like, the full flush of life, and then the rest of the body is
very pale.
Is pale until it's basically just not a body at all. It's just the paper. But one of the decisions was in the art direction and in talking about it with the guys was trying to get it to a point that, again, is more palatable on your wall. And those colors have so much more of a fleshy realism to it that it's that much more of a shocking's not the right word, but the image is a little heavier that way. And those red tones, we were looking for color tones that could be more colorful, could be a little more designy, but that weren't the wrong tone for the film. But the color of blood. Rob Jones said something about the feeling of like blood pounding in your ears. And
I can totally see that. It looks like he's very flushed in the face, like it's in a moment of real pressure. So. Yeah.
Rob Jones had a really good insight into it that led us to that color scheme.
Love Rob Jones.
Oh, he's great, isn't he?
There's a few people who've said, it was Muragaya's idea in the first place, but they said there would be a great shame companion piece for this. I think because it's two Fassbender movies.
I haven't seen that film. But I will now.
Yeah, it's another one that's possibly a little bit uncomfortable, but for different reasons. You mentioned Deadpool, and I know that there's sort of this, and we mentioned comic books and comic book films in our discussions earlier in the weekend. But I suppose you may have some. I know you have some interest in that stuff to a certain extent. But obviously, I think you're very passionate about folklore and sort of those ancient stories. And I think there's it's all culture and it's all stories. I just want to know what your sort of take on that is, and why you're so passionate about those older kind of stories, stories that have been around for a long time, and why you think that obviously people collect your stuff and they know the stories you're talking about, and why those stories have stuck around.
Right. Mm-hmm. Sure. The question of why I'm interested in it is, it's just one of those things that you you just notice about yourself and you accept as the truth. Like, I don't know why that is exactly. There is a thing that I've been thinking about more over the last few years from when I was a kid. I was like 8 or something. And like I had this really emo moment that I don't know where it came from. I don't know the train of thought that led to it, but I started to think about, I think maybe my grandmother had recently died. And I was thinking about all the people in my family who I'd never met, who I couldn't meet because they were already dead, you know, parents of parents of parents. And it all of a sudden hit me how far back that line goes of your family and the people that you're related to, and just how many hundreds of thousands of people there are you'll never meet. And like, some of them might have been amazing, and they might have been like your best friend. And I got so emotional. I was just like, I couldn't stand it. And that's probably the earliest memory I have of this kind of like really strong emotional pull towards distant past. And that's just how I am. I don't know. So, you know, characters like hero characters and monsters and like people with special powers, very interesting to me for the same reasons that everybody else likes them. But the ones that really get me are the old ones. And I find it fascinating that if you really look at those old stories, like it could go back as far as, you know, the Epic of Gilgamesh, like how different is it really from the comic book heroes that we have now? It's the same thing. It's just today. And when it comes to art, you know, we look at things like fine art, you know, painting and, you know, all, you know, fine art, like serious art. And like, we kind of tend to think that that's the standard. That's like the real version, and that, you know, the pop cultural stuff is somehow ephemeral. But I actually think it's the other way around. Personally, I think that what we call pop culture is the kind of stories people have been interested in since probably forever. And my sort of main point of interest artistically is Arthurian stories. And Matt Ferguson in one of the panels the other day had made a comment about the way people react to the MCU, where, you know, they've read the comics and then they watch the films and they're going to have really strong feelings about, you know, people like retconning this, or, you know, you didn't stay faithful to the character in this way, or, you know, you should have done this and whatever. And I think people have been doing that forever. If you look at the history of Arthurian stories, there's clear distinctions between all the different eras. You know, the Victorians wrote about him in a very different way than the people in the 11th century did. And it goes even farther back than that. And so I think, like, I kind of love that. I love that there's this at least 1,000 years of this nerd culture about this particular character.
We've just brought up one of your Arthur pieces.
Yeah.
Is it the Green Toad?
The Black Toad. Yeah.
Black Toad. Sorry, my apologies. The green variant. It's a joke.
Yeah, yeah. That's the underpainting for Arthur and Black Toad.
But yeah, I mean, it's we've got Carly Draws coming in saying that comics are kind of like modern mythology, and absolutely,
yeah, not kind of at all. Like, that's exactly what it is.
What it is.
Yep.
So and just so people, obviously, it's speaking about people with special powers and superpowers. We do have you do some stuff where with characters that do have superpowers. We'll put up Flash Gordon, and yeah, and sorry. So when you're approaching, do you have a different approach between when you're tackling something that is, you know, modern pulp culture to what you're doing when you have something that is, you know, an ancient myth or a piece of folklore? Is there any difference in your approach or in your sort of the end delivery in any way, or is it all the same thing for you?
It's not a big difference. It's not a big difference. Where I would say there's a difference is if you look at Flash Gordon and you look at Hunger. Those are very different situations. Because Hunger is a very different kind of storytelling. That is not your sort of all the stuff we were just talking about. Hunger is not like that. It's a very different kind of story. I don't know if people were telling that kind of story 1,000 years ago. I don't think so. But there you've really got a super strong concept that's been examined in great detail in the film, and so it's a much more mental, intellectual kind of idea-based process. Whereas with Flash Gordon, the concepts are so, like, we all know the concept so well. It's so archetypal that you don't have to delve into it that far. In the case of Flash Gordon, the thing is responding to it just as you. Like, what was it that you loved about it or that you found interesting? And for me, more than anything else, it's the production design is just like amazing. It's fantastic. And I love how much, like, it's practical. Like, this is probably not proper film terminology, but it's more like, I see it as more practical effects. Like, it looks like an opera set. Everything's actually built. And some of the armor is made out of foam, and that's hilarious, but it's just beautiful. Like, it's got this amazing Art Deco futurism to it. And I wanted that to be like the main ingredient in the poster. And then as far as the conceptual message, is just really basic. It's this one regular dude who's caught up in this massive, dominating alien world. And that's easy. That part's easy. I just wanted to work in, I had to edit out a million different things that I wanted to draw from the movie, right? Because I don't do that approach of posters where you try to get everything in there. I really try to pick just a few things, and I just pick my favorites.
And let them speak, and just let them speak louder.
Yeah, exactly.
And you've used, and we've just brought up, I think it's your sepia sketch for that.
Yeah.
And you are using negative, it seems like you're using negative space there. Are you using that, in what way are you using that there?
Yeah. Now, in that regard, it's not like there's not any like conceptual metaphor or anything happening. That's an arrangement of light and dark and an arrangement of shapes that just looks like punchy and powerful. So, you've got that awesome hood or collar that Ming wears, and I love perfect circles, and so I adjusted the shape of it so that it's really a perfect halo around his head, and then just built that out even further. And all that black around him just makes him so much more massive.
Well, that's what I thought. It's
imposing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I'm not sure Ming is deserving of a halo. But
no, of course not. He's horrible. But that's another thing that comes from my interest in my heritage and my the artists before me is using halos. I mean, I don't use it in the religious sense because I'm not religious, but it's such a great graphic device, the halo, the way that it just frames the head of any character. You put it on, it makes them more important, and we all know that it means, in one way or another, it means that this person is somehow special or interesting. So I use that all the time.
So we're about 35 minutes in. There are some commented questions that I thought would be nice to bring up.
Yeah, let's go.
And people, please feel free to add some more questions because as you can probably tell, Peter, you're a fountain of knowledge, and it's
about my own work.
It's pretty fun to listen to you. It's like, right. So Carly said, "Do you have a favourite collection of Arthurian tales?"
Yes and no. My favorite book about Arthur is probably not of wide interest to people. It's called The Concept of Arthur by Caitlin Green, who used the pen name Thomas Green when she wrote the book. which is a whole probably an interesting discussion on its own. But it's an academic book that's basically trying to determine what the original Arthur is. So there's a whole stream, like there's a whole, like you might call it a fandom about the historical Arthur. So the idea that King Arthur was a real guy, and that's what all the stories are based on, and that you might be able to figure out who he was. And it's a dead end in the end, honestly. But this person has gone through the old literature trying to say, she starts by showing how if there was ever such thing as a real Arthur, you're never going to know who he was. So leave it there. But what, in the fictional sense, what's the original? And she's making the case that the original Arthur, at least as far as any records, like any actual written stories that exist, is a Welsh British, ancient British character who's more, honestly, he's more like a Hellboy. He's a character who can travel between this world and the other world, who's possessed of, great physical strength and courage and size, and basically defends the waking world against, all comers. So monsters, spirits, whatever, human invaders. And that he's just really like a superhero character, like a folkloric, like hero character. But that how he got famous across the rest of the world was by becoming this kind of like semi-historical character that Geoffrey of Monmouth invented, and then later became this courtly romance and like knights in shining armor. Whereas his actual origins are in a time where there were no castles, nobody wore plate armor, there was no courtly romance. It was the Dark Ages. And that's like that idea. When I discovered that, I just my head just went pow, because I never liked the courtly Arthur. Like I thought it was kind of cool, but it didn't really do it for me. But then when I discovered this idea that actually he began as a character who's much more like all the characters that I grew up reading about in comic books, and that there was so much more like supernatural stuff involved with it, I just thought, oh man, that's really exciting. So any of the drawings I do of Arthur, that's the guy that I'm drawing. So that book explains it. And for me, I've read that book like 3 times. Most people will pick that up and fall asleep. But if anybody in here picks up that book and enjoys it, then write me an email.
So what we learned there is if you ask him a question about Arthur,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No. People enjoy it. It's.
I don't know.
Your fans. Do not feel even remotely guilty. I've just got some more questions coming in. So Muragaya asks, and thank you for watching, Sham. I think you've commented on virtually every session. So hello. What are your thoughts on Gerhard Richter's work, and would you go down a fully abstract world in addition to your main body of work like he did?
Oh my goodness. I think you've stumped me there, my friend. Here, hold on a second. Gerhard Richter. I am not familiar with this man, so I'm not sure I can answer that. As far as fully abstract goes, I don't know if I can hack it, to be honest with you. I don't know if I can do anything interesting in that idiom. Like if I had more time, I would love to try it. I'm not sure it would be any good though. I think it's maybe there's something fundamental in whatever's interesting in what I do. I think is very tied to, representing living things in a relatively direct sort of way. But like ornamentation, like there's a kind of an abstraction that I really do get into. But I'm not sure, but I suspect that if it's divorced from narratives and characters, I would probably just not do anything any good.
Well, I think you love stories, don't you? I think that's safe to say. now? I thought there was going to be a culture off there, but we're okay. We've got a comment from Joel Woodford, and I think he's trying to test me with names that I've never said before, hoping that I might trip up and say it wrong. Always meant to ask this. Always meant to ask. Well, you could have sent him a message. Anyway, always meant to ask this. Is Peter's style also influenced by ukiyo-e?
Yeah, ukiyo-e. Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. Yes, absolutely.
That familiar
absolutely.
Perspective where it doesn't feel entirely 3D, is what he says.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, big fat yes. This is another one I'm going to talk for half an hour on if you let me. So let's be careful. But yes, definitely. I love that stuff. Especially the Arthurian work, like that one of him wrestling the toad, is entirely an homage to Kuniyoshi. And I wanted to do something similar to what he was doing, but it, not trying to do Japanese stuff because that's not my heritage. So I dug into where I come from, but yeah, very much building the image in a similar way. And yeah, I love that stuff. Absolutely adore it.
And we've got Lumo asks, you've compared creating art to music composition. Do you have any favorite composers? And what do you listen to when you're creating, if anything?
Right. Well, when it comes to like music, is my other great love. I used to play a lot of music. Most of the stuff I listen to, you probably these days wouldn't call them composers. It's mostly, bands with drums and bass and, guitars and
which I find is so interesting because it's sort of, you'd think that given your love of classic stories.
This is the thing. I've started only in the last few years to address that. And I've been listening to a lot more orchestral music, but I'm still learning. Like I'm a complete noob when it comes to orchestral music, and there's a lot to know. It's I love the planets. It feels like it's illustrative, right? It's got a concept, and it helps you listen to it. It helps you to understand what it's trying to do. And I've looked for compositions that are like that. Like there's pictures from an exhibition that also has like a concept that goes through it. And yeah, I've been working through it. I don't know yet what my favorites are. I really enjoy listening to orchestral music, but I'm still just learning.
I was going to say, is The Planets the first concept album?
That's what I've always asked, right? Like that's exactly how I feel about it. Yeah, exactly.
We've got if people want to, we'll try and get another question or two, but we are running out of time. But we've got a giveaway.
Right.
We've been presented with a question by Peter, but I must confess I didn't ask him for the answer. Don't say it, Peter.
I wrote it to you in the chat. I don't know.
Did you? Fantastic.
Yes, I did.
That's good. That helps me.
Yeah. I'm just gonna get the prints here.
Did you definitely write it to me in the chat?
Yeah, in the Zoom thing, there's a little.
In the Zoom call, there's it.
But I can see what people.
Don't click it yet.
What people are chatting on YouTube as well, so
okay.
I'll be able to see it.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, Peter's going to be the adjudicator then.
Here, let's show the prints though first. So
we'll go pop them up on screen. Do you want to show them in physical? They're very lovely.
Yeah, there's two of them. It's a series of 5 prints that I did on the from small paintings of the 5 senses. And so it's the full set of the 5. There's 4 of them, and then the last one is.
We'll quickly pop the image up on screen. Key's doing this. Key's doing this. I'll show you can't. I'll show people on the screen in a minute, so people can see those pictures. They are really lovely, really lovely portraits. So I'm going to give you the question in a second if you come back to the camera. Yes, Key was going like this. Besotted with the artwork. You're one of our favourites, you know that. So the question is, what is the Green Knight's real name? What is the Green Knight's real name?
The original Green Knight, not in the movie. I haven't seen the movie yet, so don't spoil anything for me.
There you go, the original.
Yeah, people might have to Google that one. Who can Google faster?
If you're watching it on your phone, it's like, close YouTube. God, quick.
No, it's not Gawain. Gawain is the main character, but unless in the film the Green Knight is really Gawain. No, that's not right.
All right. Culture.
Yes, caffeine and collectibles. You got it.
There you go. Well done on the Googling. We're gonna pop, if we can, pop your store link onto the YouTube comments. Thank you so much for joining us again, Peter. Thank you for braving the allergies. I can totally relate on allergy issues. My eyes have been puffy from moving furniture and rising dust, and people have been saying, you look so tired. I'm like, I'm not that tired. I'm very allergic.
Let me show one thing just before we go. Okay. I'm not dropping these now because I'm not organized enough, but I have these APs of my Wolfwalkers poster. And yeah, this is the one that I have at the moment is in a frame, but I'm going to be, this is 24 by 36. This is just a slightly bigger frame.
Right, okay.
But I'm going to be putting these up on my shop next week, I hope. But if you're in the Facebook group or whatever, I'll announce it and so on. But yeah, that's something to look out for. And I've only got a few copies, so.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Peter. And Caffeine Collectibles, please do contact us, and then we'll know who you actually are, because so far you're Caffeine and Collectibles.
I look forward to mailing those to Saskatchewan, Saskabush.
Nice. So, everybody, thank you for watching. We're going to be joined by Krzysztof Domoradsky and Grzegorz Domoradsky very shortly. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Hey, man.